Good afternoon, everyone. We are super excited to present the next session to you. Here we'll explore the concept of energy-enabled entrepreneurship across sector, a value chain approach. We'll start with two very interesting case studies on this subject, presented by two amazing entrepreneurs, quickly followed by an engaging panel discussion. The topic for the first case study is Solar Silk, improving efficiency of traditional silk value chain. I welcome Kunal Vaid of Resham Sutra to present this to you. Kunal, it'll be great if you can share your screen and start the presentation.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm very happy to present to you Resham Sutra, the company I co-founded. So at Resham Sutra, we are working to improve livelihoods for rural textile producers, the silk weavers and yarn producers. So our mission here is to bring together innovations in technology, business processes, and marketing. We started as a full-fledged technology company. We started as innovators in equipment that would improve productivity for the rural producers. We have innovated about 10 different machines, most of which are solar powered. And these would help the rural producers to more than double their productivity and hence their income. But pretty early in our journey, we realized that just technology is not really going to take us to the goal that we are trying to reach. We will have to step in, we'll have to take care of other aspects of business, whether it is financing or is it marketing or teaching business processes to all of our customers. So now we have shifted our gears. We are now focused on a complete value chain development. We try to create integrated rural value chains, starting with farming. We help the farmers come together, form a bigger producer group. We help them with getting the right technology, getting the right quality of inputs and the techniques. And then we follow the similar process with other producers downstream for yarn spinners and for weavers. And then we also help them to find ways to improve their realization, because ultimately what we realized is that these people traditionally are working at a place where they are at an exploitative level of income. They are extremely low, and that is absolutely unsustainable. Clear consequence of that is that new generation is not getting into the traditional arts of producing textiles like silk and all. So we help them to improve the quality of their product, to improve the marketing, to reach out to a much wider market than what is traditionally available to them. And then we back it up with certification in quality, whether it is organic certification, whether it is certification about what sort of processes were followed. It is traceability of where what activity happened and what raw material went into it, so that the customer also has a greater confidence and a reason to give a better value to products that come through this cycle versus what they would see in a traditional kind of market cycle. And then we also help them to get better value for the waste by finding out better utilization. For example, making handmade paper from mulberry waste, or creating pallets from the farm waste. I'll take you through a case study of one of the first groups that we supported in the complete value chain model. This is a group that is based out of Ramgarh in Jharkhand. So this is an area which traditionally had weavers, and it also had good proximity to the raw material sources, but it did not have any yarn production. So we introduced this activity, started with a group of 40 women. So initially, these women did not have any idea about how to do this work. They did not have the equipment or the raw material. So we provided them the equipment on an EMI basis over a year. Then we connected them to raw material suppliers. And what we did there, because the raw material for silk has to be procured once a year, and then it has to be consumed throughout the year. So that would bring in a lot of investment for anybody upfront. So we provided a guarantee to the raw material stockist. We did not give the full value of the raw material, but a fraction of the cost. And then they stored the raw material for the group, and gradually the group would consume it. And then next step, of course, was training. So again, we got some assistance with training organizations that already existed in the state, government-run training organizations. Then for the market linkage, again, we helped them to connect to weavers who were there in the region, and then weavers in other geographies as well. So once all of this ecosystem developed, so within a period of a year, the group was on its own feet and it became a sustainable model. Within a year, they had paid us the full amount for the machine. Our raw material guarantees were already cleared, and they understood the business now. They directly dealt with the raw material producers, they directly dealt with the market. And we actually, our job was done there, and we focused on bringing in the next group and the next after that. So overall, in that village now, the activity has grown to 200 women, and there is a potential to grow further, which we are working on. Some of our key lessons through this journey. So far, we are working with about 12,000 producers spread across more than 100 villages in eastern and northeastern parts of the country. So the first and very important solution, very important lesson for us is that we are in the business of providing solutions. Just providing equipment will not really help us to find the goal that we are looking for. And we cannot say at any point in time that somebody else should step in and do rest of the work. You know, when we get in, we are introducing the producers to a particular activity. So we have to take care of many of the problems that they are facing and they are likely to face. The kind of model that we are trying to build is that it is a well-developed ecosystem to which all the producers, whether you are a farmer or you are a yarn producer or you are a weaver, you can just plug in. You can plug in and do your role and do it well and just focus on that part. And then there is somebody at the back end who is taking care of rest of the larger ecosystem issues. And we know that as a startup, as a small company, we cannot do it alone. We need to have partners. So we are very happy to find partners in every arena, whether there's a partner in training, it's a partner in financing, or even other equipment manufacturers for complementary equipment or for marketing. So we work with many partners and together we make it happen because everything is too big for any one person. And then another thing we realized is that we cannot go about trying to create new models every time. We have to take one model and we have to develop multiple units of it. So we have one unit of what has worked well in one area and then try to put it, maybe tweak it a bit sometimes if needed, but try to put the same thing more or less in multiple geographies. So we don't have to learn everything all over. And then one question is, what is in it for an equipment supplier, for an energy company? Why get into it? So one big advantage that we see is that once we have done this, we have a blue ocean of opportunity. Today, if somebody asks me about a competition, I really have to think about it. I mean, I would not want to be my own competitor. It's been such a a long, strenuous journey. So I don't see how somebody else would tread that same path. Maybe they will come up and discover a
Hi.
new different path.
Hi Kunal, thank you so much. I'm sort of pushed to like hand this session over to Vasant right now. Thank you so much for presenting Resham Sutra to us. Vasant, our next entrepreneur. Vasant, it'll be great if you can do your screen share. To the audience, the topic for this case study is vertical farming, creating micro entrepreneurs to solve India's fodder shortage. Over to you, Vasant. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you.
Thanks. Kunal, it'll be great if you can stop your screen sharing. Kunal?
Yeah.
All right, thanks. Vasant, you can share your screen.
Yep.
Thanks.
Is the presentation visible to everybody?
Yes, it'll be great if you can put it on full screen. Yeah, thanks, Vasant.
Yeah. Yeah. Good evening, everybody. So we design climate sustainable solutions that deliver on the economic well-being of our customers. India is, one of the largest dairy enterprise in the world. But the problem is that there is massive shortage of fodder across the country, especially during the summer season. There is a loss of about 15 to 25% of dairy income because of climate variability and several other reasons, right? And there's also an opportunity to solve the methane emissions from livestock. So we focused on both of these. And by doing that, we add around 250 rupees more into a farmer's kitty every day. So this is a solution that we have designed, which operates entirely on solar. And it can operate even at very high temperatures to be able to provide you with 25 to 30 kgs of high protein fodder that can be harvested every day, can be fed to about 4 cattle, and you get 2 to 3 liters more milk, which we have demonstrated across the country. Compared to growing it on the ground, there's a savings of about 3 lakh liters of water. This can operate at just about half a bucket and with just about 12 square feet space, and can be placed outside the farmer's house or outside livestock shed. These are some examples of where we've installed across India, Rajasthan, Anandpur. We're focused on very dry and arid regions where the value is realized almost immediately. We also, this is just to summarize the impact that we have on revenue, on environment, as well as on the water in the local communities. To give you an example, in Rajasthan, there's a place called Pokhran, which has very high temperatures across the year. And we've been able to grow fodder throughout the year and be able to impact the local economy there. And also, there's opportunity to reduce methane. So tender the fodder, lower the methane, right? And so we're reducing that indirectly by also helping increase the income there. During this pandemic, we could not go to remote places, do the installations. A lot many farmers couldn't afford. So we thought about a different model where we can still provide high protein fodder access, and that's what we call as the fodder station. Fodder station is a place where multiple systems are sort of put together near to a milk collection center, right? So if it is a milk collection center, all the farmers come in the morning and evening to put the milk, and it is very easy for them to just carry a tray along with them or just carry some fodder along with them. The difference is that since the protein content is very high in this fodder, there is a ready access to nutritive fodder through which you can get about 2 to 3 liters more milk, right? And the same facility can double up to grow nursery during the monsoon seasons, whether it's tomato nursery or marigold or whatever that is, which is required for the local community. And during the winter, in case there is some surplus of fodder available in the region, the same system and the fodder station can double up to grow oyster mushrooms. Of course, we have to create a network, supply chain network that can, sustain this during the winter period of time. Here is an example of the pilot study that we're doing in Chitradurga in north part of Karnataka. You can see a farmer carrying the fodder in the two-wheeler, and this is happening every day. We're sold out of fodder there, and we are planning to increase the capacity and also set up these fodder stations across the country. This is entirely powered by solar, and we've pushed the technology to operate at its limit by being able to, use water very efficiently, whether it's cooling or heating or whatever those systems are. That runs within the purview of the solar power that is available to you every day. So this is very little about hydrogreens. I'll stop here. Just some samples of images that we've done using nursery. And these are some samples of images that we've done growing oyster mushrooms in a lab. And this is also happening in Chitradurga. Thank you very much. And, this is our contact number.
Hey, thank you so much, Vasant. And thanks for helping me timekeep as well. And so we'll start with our panel discussion right now. The topic for the discussion today is, yes, energy-enabled entrepreneurship, a cross-sector value chain approach. I'm taking the opportunity to introduce the panelists now. We have Mr. Ross Bruton, Senior Incubation Manager at Carbon Trust. And he's also the Head of Venture Services at Energy Catalyst Accelerator Round 7. Mr. Tushar Devdayal, CEO at DD Solar. Tushar founded Devdayal Solar Solutions in 2015 and is the full-time CEO. Next, we have Mr. Donson D. Sousa, CEO at Black Frog Technology. He's a mechanical engineer by formal training and a NIDI EIR fellow. Next, we have Mr. Evan Murimi, co-founder of Peribere Energy Limited, an organization seeking to transform lives through smart energy services. Last but not the least, the session is going to be moderated by Ms. Divya Kotidale. She's the Communications Director at Power for All in India. Over to you, Ms. Divya.
Thank you, Bala, for that introduction. And thank you to all the panelists for participating in this session. We're looking forward to an interesting discussion around the changing landscape of clean energy entrepreneurship in India and globally, and listening to your perspectives on this. We just listened to some excellent examples of productive use innovation from Resham Sutra and Hydrogreens, and both these enterprises have leveraged the power of clean energy solutions to address challenges in other sectors, and this sets us up well for the discussion that we're about to have. As we all know, the clean energy sector has come a long way from just basic provision of energy services for lighting and other household uses to now solving for other domains like agriculture and livelihood, healthcare and others. And not only has this enabled the sector to grow, but it's also now providing jobs, promoting financial inclusion, and contributing to sustainable development goals. So I'm going to start this conversation first, with Tushar. Tushar, you started DD Solar in 2015, and focusing on developing off-grid appliances. And I'm sure in the last 6 years, you've seen the clean energy sector in India, specifically innovation in the sector and entrepreneurship, change quite a bit. So can you talk to us a little bit about your experience so far?
Yeah, thanks, Divya. You're right. So we started in 2015, and the avatar of that business was very different than what it is today. We were a solar street lighting company. We were doing thousands of installations. And then sometime around 2017, when there was a big push to electrify and reach every village, and there was the LED bulb revolution, at that point, we realized that lighting had a somewhat limited future for solar, and we needed to move to something else. Also, we realized one big thing, and that was that it wasn't just off-grid that we needed to focus on, but we needed to focus on things like weak grid or bad grid. So either unreliable electricity or electricity that wasn't available when the consumer demanded it. So with that in mind, we started, looking at things like AC/DC interoperability, and particularly with our solar refrigerators, we started looking as energy as a means to livelihood. So it was mainstreaming DRE for rural livelihoods. So as we went down that path, we realized that we couldn't just sell a solar refrigerator as a solar refrigerator. It had to solve a problem, and those problems could be in healthcare, like what Donson's doing. It could be agriculture, productive uses that we are doing, and clean energy and solar energy needed to be an enabler. So one of the things that the recent Gogla report that came out on DRE solar refrigeration in India. Again, what I liked about that report was that it reflected exactly this. There was no market for solar refrigerators. Rather, there was the vaccine market, and that we could go to, like, say, at 800 million. There was the micro enterprise segment at 634 million. There was a farm gate segment. There was a dairy segment. So I think that report also clearly separated industry from market. And the sooner we realize as an industry that we need to verticalize our offerings, we need to use our energy technology and our innovations for a particular industry, for a particular solution, and make that productive use, make that remunerative for the customer, so that they generate a monthly income from that. The sooner we have data to prove that, the sooner it's easier for financiers to get on board, investors to get on board. And innovation that's changed in our company over the last year, because we started this vertical strategy, has also just been so different. So for veterinary vaccine storage, autonomy is, paramount. So then we're sizing puff thickness, or solar panels need to be doubled, or compressor efficiency needs to be really looked at very closely. If you're looking at dairy, then pull down needs to be faster. If you're looking at, for example, storing in the fish segment, then we're looking at sub-zero temperatures. So the markets are driving our innovation. We are focused on productive use. And I think that the productive use thinking model has been real. I mean, investors have caught on. We're part of this Powering Livelihoods program that's jointly run by Vilgro and CEEW. They understand that mainstreaming solar for productive use and for livelihoods is critical. And more people are viewing solar as just an enabler, the consumer as central, and the industry as where you should focus your solution.
Great, thanks, Tushar. Yeah, absolutely. Like, just like you said, not just focusing on off-grid, but also weak-grid appliances, and some of the work that Thomson and BlackFrog Technologies have been doing, just in that space, leveraging that technology for pushing innovation in the health sector. And Thomson, I'm sure you resonate with a lot of what Tushar has just said. I'm just, my question to you is more around, now with the government has this increased push on domestic manufacturing, how do you see India's positioning in the global market? And, can we actually be a market leader when it comes to clean energy appliances?
Right. Thank you, Divya. Yeah, I mean, the short answer would be yes, considering that India has always been, we've been big on manufacturing, but mainly on heavy industries. But when it comes to appliances, we have been always lacking. And even if we develop something in India, we would always bank on some other countries to manufacture it for us. So, but that is definitely changing. I mean, government actually realized that, especially with COVID coming in picture, where you actually need appliances which are not available to you. That's when whole dependency on medical devices already came about. And there's been a lot of new developments since then with the whole Atmanirbhar Bharat program, as well as other support that's coming for MSMEs. So we are working on Embolio, which is a portable biomedical refrigerator for transportation of critical biologicals like vaccines. So we've been, so especially for us, we've been trying to manufacture in India itself, because we want to employ local people, our people, and use local resources to get this out into the world. So we are currently working towards WHO PQS certification, which will give us access to 192 other UN countries. and we'll be able to cater to all of the requirement for delivery of vaccines globally. And we actually have the skill set as well as the capabilities to make it happen. It's just that we might have had some inertia for us to get to that stage and get it rolling, right? That is where we've been having a problem with. But I mean, we've been deploying this unit mainly for transportation of human vaccines as well as animal vaccines. I would like to talk about especially recent deployment in Manipur, where we use this for transportation of vaccines. Especially, they're also deploying it for COVID-19 vaccines as well, where the issue was that it's in very remote locations where, like Atushar mentioned, that there is 100% electrification, but erratic power supply is the main issue. And since ours is a battery operated device that's completely solar operable as well, we are able to deliver efficacious vaccines without compromising whatsoever on that, and make sure that people get what they actually are looking for.
Great, that's great to hear. Thanks, Alvin. Now I want to move to Dr. Evan. Your work in Kenya, especially focused around social and economic development through the delivery of smart energy services, especially in the area of clean cooking. And I know with something like clean cooking, it takes a lot of convincing for people to move from traditional fuels to clean cooking. And so that's sort of highlighting the need for awareness building, especially among the consumers, the consumer markets. So tell us a little bit about your work in that sector and the lessons learned and how you've gone about that.
Yes, thank you, Divya. As well introduced, Ivan, co-founder of Peribea Energy Limited. We are currently involved in electric cooking here in Kenya, and we are planning to go beyond the borders to some other sub-Saharan African countries. At the moment, we are using AC-based electric pressure cookers, and we are hoping in the near future, we are trying to design some electric pressure cookers that could be DC-based and suitable for either off-grid or, in some instances, anyone who may want to have an off-grid panel to power their system. So this work has been funded by Modern Energy Cooking Services in Loughborough University. And what we are doing is to pilot the electric pressure cookers in a number of rural areas in Kenya. The reason we are targeting the rural areas, one, we know that rural electrification alone has been known not to provide the necessary impact that is intended to provide. And therefore, we are looking at going beyond just putting the electric cables in the houses and try and train people on what they can do with the electricity. One of the ways, of course, we've identified is in cooking. We know that in the previous past, or in the past, the campaign has been to go through what we call, what has been traditionally known as clean cooking. That is, use biomass, but use more efficient stoves. However, because we already have electricity in the houses, then if we can prove to the people that instead of using biomass, you can use electricity to cook, and it's going to save you money as much as it's also going to have better health impact. Now, we realized that just taking the electric pressure cookers to the masses and telling them by word of mouth that it's going to be more efficient won't have much impact. So we needed to come up with a way of measuring what they use using their traditional fuels. And we also designed an innovative meter, or what I would call a data logger. This one here, I hope it's visible. And the data logger is simply designed to take the readings and give us the cost of the meal that is being cooked. We've designed it in such a way that it's customizable. We have local menu as per the regions that we are to go, and we are using local language where the people will understand how the data logger is working. And then from there now, we just connect it to the pressure cooker, and then as someone is cooking, they'll be able to tell how much energy am I using and what's the cost of that energy. the preliminary research we've done, we've had two shows or two awareness campaigns in the capital city, Nairobi. And we've had overwhelming response where people are actually shocked as how little energy the pressure cookers use as compared to their traditional cooking fuels. With that, we have a feeling, and in fact, we are convinced that even in rural areas, people will be convinced that electric cooking is not as expensive as we've been thinking about it when we consider efficient devices like electric pressure cookers. However, the next question that we shall need to answer now is how do these people then get to afford to buy these electric pressure cookers? Because a typical one is costing around 80 to 100 US dollars, which is beyond the reach of most of the people in rural areas. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, the affordability challenge, even within this, is something that needs to be addressed. Ross, just coming to you just from an investor's perspective, there is a lot more now interest from the finance and investment world. There's more investment available for clean energy startups than there was, say, 10 years ago. And just from your perspective, with your work with the Carbon Trust and Energy Catalyst, what are some of the trends that have contributed to this change? And what are the trends that you foresee in the coming year that will further change the sector?
Yeah, thanks, Divya. I think really what's really pushed the market forward is the pioneering efforts of many innovators and investors over the past decade in really establishing a baseline understanding of customer need and customer information and data, and then establishing different forms of financial mechanisms to treat the issues of that upfront cost that was raised by Dr. Evan just a second ago. I think a lot of investors in the early stages of this particularly equity investors, got burnt. Obviously, the need is just massive. If you look at Africa as an example, only 40% of the continent electrified, just a huge amount of need for different forms of remote power applications. So I think it was an effort where a lot of investors rushed in really early and then started not meeting the timeframes for exit and not meeting the kind of valuations for exit that they were expecting. But that being said, the kind of groundwork that was being put in place, particularly for developers and investors in different forms of solar and solar appliance technologies earlier on in the decade, and how that accomplished the market in understanding the customer more, developing different forms of last mile distribution networks, gathering additional customer data that allows these kind of investments to be de-risked by different debt providers and equity providers, has really led to both an increase in the amount of investment that's provided into the market quite dramatically over the past 5 years, a lot of which has actually been contributed by debt finance, not necessarily equity finance, as the kind of technologies and remote power technologies, starting with solar, but then developing into more advanced productive use technologies or even different forms of integrated mini-grid technologies, has become more investable and more de-risked through a greater understanding of the customer, number one, understanding of that value that was mentioned by Tushar a bit earlier, treating the value and then developing a business model around that that is financeable. I think something that was done really well within the solar market in Africa and solar appliance market in Africa is the development of the pay-go business model, right? So pay-per-service business model, which now that there's a sufficient amount of debt finances, understanding those models, understanding that there is actually a viable payback mechanism around some of these models, they can start thinking about how do we extend these models into more advanced productive use systems, more expensive systems. We mentioned electric cookers earlier on as well. So how do we start expanding our portfolio, not just for new providers, but for existing providers of solar products? How can we start expanding our portfolio of products and portfolio of equipment, leverage the kind of finance and debt finance that we have for these kind of pay-go systems, as well as our last mile distribution networks, to be able to serve or at least significantly reduce the cost of serving those markets. So I think a combination of those pioneering efforts from early entrepreneurs as well as investors that were willing to take the risk has really laid the groundwork for an increased amount of investor confidence both from equity as well as debt finance over the past decade. I think what we've really seen as well is a lot of the efforts of large corporates that initially saw this market as corporate social responsibility spend or CSR spend within their budgets. Many of them, you've seen a lot of spin-offs into different forms of corporate venture capital-based mechanisms that are focusing exclusively on addressing this challenge of energy access within markets such as Africa. And within those kind of strategic planning, how do we maximize the values of these kind of investments through more advanced products?
Yeah, that's really interesting. Thanks. And I think I just want to, before we open it up to the questions from the panel, I just want to talk a little bit about the potential of jobs in the sector. I think there's been a lot of talk around that. In 2019, Power for All did the Sparring Job Census, where we found that the GRE sector is now a significant employer in emerging markets, and at that point 2 years ago we predicted that was going to grow, and things have changed since then because of COVID, but it's still fairly a large market that is in the productive use sector especially, that has the potential to create jobs in rural areas. And that can contribute to towards achieving SDGs and helping move towards this global energy transition that we're all talking about. But how can the sector actually leverage this potential to grow in the right way? And this question is actually open to any of the panelists, and I'm also going to link that into the first question that we've got from the audience, which is what is the weakest link within this productive use ecosystem that can be addressed? Does anyone want to take that?
So, sure.
Okay, go ahead. So I'll jump in next.
Okay. So I think I'm taking the question on the weakest link, and I'll tell you what we've struggled with most is with market linkages. So and I'm talking about forward market linkages. So what we do as a technology developer is we spend all our time developing the product, certifying the product, doing the pilots, and in our case, we should have also parallelly done a lot of forward market linkages, because I think that one of the challenges is aggregation or customer aggregation. Customer density is quite low. So we're talking about maybe 3 or 4 fridges per village, and then you move to the next village or the next town. And so if in terms of help that we could get from the sector, is any demand aggregation program or demand aggregation platform would be incredibly helpful. So forward linkages is the challenge that I think is big.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think it's a challenge that's faced by a lot of the companies we work with as well. And I think when it comes to productive use compared to cheaper solar appliances, as an example, you're talking about more expensive equipment, right? Which goes directly to that upfront cost for that customer. And there's 2 ways that are being addressed that I mentioned a bit earlier. Either you can reduce the upfront cost, or you can go to what Tushar was mentioning earlier, and that is really proving the business case and the value to these customers. For most productive used equipment, it means better revenue and lower costs for the individuals that are using these systems. If you're a small farmer and you're able to produce products all year round because you have a solar water pump, that is a direct benefit to that customer. So I think a lot of companies really need to put in a lot of work in understanding and really developing and proving that business case to customers and demonstrating on the ground that business case to customers and communicating in a way that they understand. And this maybe goes back to the job creation aspect as well. I mean, outside of direct investment into manufacturing and assembling within those countries, which is definitely of interest to the different kinds of innovators that are accessing these markets, the establishment of local sales teams and last mile distributors and leveraging last mile distributors and existing relationships and networks within these markets to be able to explain this value to customers in the way that they understand and the way that they trust is something that a lot of groundwork needs to be put in by companies. And if it isn't done, it does take quite a heavy lift to then take your innovation and put it and frame it and communicate it in such a way that the customer understands and trusts.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, one of the other questions, this is either to Evan or Ross. What are the reasons for the success of PayGo in Africa, and how can that success be replicated in India?
Maybe I'll comment on the Indian aspect of it. I think the reasons for the PayGo success really in Africa is, and maybe I mentioned a bit earlier, is a lot of the groundwork that has been put into de-risking serving communities that often don't have the available funding to pay upfront costs for systems, right? So first, it really comes down to the early innovators within the market is working with local debt providers on an ongoing basis. And local debt provision is a huge success factor in this, right? If you're dealing with different forms of forex exchange rates and you're lending internationally for this PayGo system, it adds a lot of risk to who's ever providing that debt. So a lot of the networking and work that was done by early entrepreneurs in establishing those networks and proving those business models and business cases to local debt providers as well as international providers really laid the groundwork for that PayGo system to exist. And there were a lot of failures and there was a lot of risk in individuals approaching that, but there were a few companies that came out of that really strong across the continent and really has proved that a PayGo model can be financially backable and can be profitable and very profitable for the kind of institutions that get involved. And then as soon as you get a few of those strong cases coming out of the market, immediately that kind of investment is seen as a lower risk by the different forms of debt providers. I think above and beyond that, as I said before, and the data is important. If you can prove that there is a demand base that exists within a country that's willing to pay the prices of a solar module or some form of monthly payment for that particular solar module, and that data is collected and usable for other forms of pitches and business cases to different forms of investors and debt providers. As that data grows, the technologies and the business models become more de-risked, which again supports the increase in that model.
Thanks. Evan, did you have anything to comment on that? And I'll just link it up with the next question, which is, how are entrepreneurs dealing with consumer financing in the productive use space? I think that's something that you mentioned in your earlier remarks as well.
Yes, thanks so much. I agree with what Rosa said. Here in Africa, of course, the issue of affordability is one of the biggest risks in terms of bringing new products in the market. We are talking about a majority of the population whose income is just a few dollars per year. And some of these, especially DC products, because they've not yet got to a point where they are being mass produced, they are still a little more expensive as compared to the AC counterparts. A case in point could be when we look at like the DC fridges as compared to the AC fridges. So the PayGo model, again, has been supported by, especially if I talk about my country, Kenya, which is one of the case studies in Africa to look at when you're talking about PayGo model. We have a very high penetration of mobile phones, whether feature phones or smartphones. And that has helped, and now the innovators to come to the market and say, we can then use the PayGo model and connect it to people's mobile phones or mobile phone payment platforms, which has been well received by most of the people. Sorry, could you kindly repeat the next question?
The question was, how are entrepreneurs dealing with consumer financing, especially in the productive use space?
Yes, well, there's still a lot that is happening in productive use of energy. And of course, as we were saying, PayGo is one of the mostly used model, but we also have other means of financing, including having microfinancing institutions. Again, a case in Kenya, we have a number of microfinancing institutions that are targeting the rural population, be it in agriculture, small and micro enterprises, or any other productive use of energy activities. We're also starting to see governments are starting to appreciate that this segment of the population needs to be brought on board in terms of improving their quality of life through getting the appliances, because we have realized that just by taking electricity, say grid electricity to the population, it's very expensive, and it's not really, from an economic point of view, it's going to take forever to pay back the cost of electrification to a household that just has 2 bulbs. But then through these other activities where you're encouraging people to use the energy, governments are also coming in and say, bringing in other partners to help in finance, so that now the quality of life can improve as these people own more appliances.
Thank you. So the next question, I think this is for Tushar or Johnson, and there's actually 2 questions, but I'm going to club them together. So one is like, are you looking at the nonprofits? Are you looking at nonprofits who work in the sector as a forward market linkage option, especially considering them as customer aggregators? And also, if you could share an example where a collaborative approach between 2 enterprises has created a successful model. Either creating these linkages, either backward linkage or a forward linkage. Either Tushar or Johnson, one of you want to take this question?
Yeah. So I mean, we have been working with a lot of NGOs in India actually for deployment of these devices. Obviously everybody's mentioned the cost being a big problem for anybody incorporating these devices. So this is where the NGOs come into picture, where we actually work with them and they provide the finances for the end user, and then there is a model where they're probably finding a way to repay that amount back to the NGO over the course of time. So that is how we've been working with them so far, and especially with COVID, all these devices that we've been deploying some units in the tribal region, the tribal belt in Karnataka and Tamil Nadu, as well as in Manipur. So all of these deployments are via NGOs, and we are heavily dependent on NGOs because they understand the problem, and they're able to reach out to the people on the ground quite easily, because we are, in the end of the day, we are manufacturers, we're sitting in a different corner. They understand the ground reality. And they're much more able to communicate the requirement to us as well. I mean, we can meet the people, we can understand to a certain extent, but I mean, they understand the actual reality. So, I mean, yes, we are looking to work with more and more NGOs and understand more and more different demographics and different requirement. Yeah, we're looking forward to working with more of your this.
Do you have any specific examples to share of this kind of collaborative approach?
Yeah, so we work with Selco Foundation. So all these deployments have been happening with Selco Foundation. So wherein the one we're going is about we're vaccinating about our device use vaccination of about 20,000, about 350 hamlets across a region of about, I think, 200 to 300 square kilometers. And so these are very hard to reach places where people don't really understand what vaccination exactly means. Or don't have access to any kind of medication whatsoever. So these are like mobile clinics that are solar powered, who actually go to these very remote locations, and our device is actually used to transport the vaccines in it, and then you vaccinate the people. And I mean, you ensure that they are not catching any disease that is not supposed to be on the face of the planet, right? So that is the kind of work we've been doing with the NGOs. I mean, yeah, so that's how it's been.
Yeah. I'd like to add that when it comes to productive use appliances, I think any discussion's incomplete when you skip efficiency for access, run out of the Energy Saving Trust in the UK. They've been great supporters of cooling technology, off-grid cooling technology, and one of the R&D grants we got via IKEA Foundation and run through Energy Saving Trust enabled us to do fairly large-scale deployment in India, and now we're moving to Tanzania with it. In other CSR initiatives, Tata Trust was a first mover when it came to veterinary vaccine space, and I think Donson already mentioned Selco Foundation. They were also early adopters. So when it comes to NGOs, I think that in terms of early adoption, in terms of some sort of pilot, in some sort of proof of concept, they are already helping us. I think we need many more thinkers like Efficiency for Access, Selco, IKEA Foundation, Tata Trust to deploy this. And if I may take another 30 seconds on that financing question, financing for productive use is very challenging. Beyond our small world of donors and impact investors, when you go to a commercial bank, it's it's almost like consumer awareness, but for a banker. So, you're starting with what is a solar refrigerator, right down to productive use. What is productive use? So I think that that part of financer education is a challenge. We have addressed that, and we have been fortunate to be able to address that through Powering Livelihoods with a first loss default guarantee. That gives a lot of comfort to the financer, and that I think is going to be something that needs to be done for almost all productive use applications.
Thanks, Tushar, and thanks, Thompson, for your comments on that. This question is for Ross again. Ross, as well as maybe some of the entrepreneurs want to answer this as well, but have you looked into blended finance, and what would be your views on this, and also some of the entrepreneurs on this panel? Have you looked into that option, and what has your experience been like?
Yeah, I'm not going to comment too much on blended finance, Divya. As the accelerator that we run is predominantly around providing grant finance and then step-off finance into different forms of equity investment. So I'll let some of the other panelists talk around blended finance. That being said, it does in commercializing, getting through these challenges and commercializing these technologies within the markets that they're accessing, which in many respects for some of these, particularly within Africa around productive use, they're quite pioneering in some of these markets. Other regions are a bit further along in terms of moving down the productive use curve, and Africa's there as well. But there are new markets and pockets of markets that it's really difficult to do. So when it comes to finance, there's inevitably a blended finance approach that needs to be taken in one way or another by entrepreneurs accessing. But I'm gonna hand over to some of the entrepreneurs to give some first-hand experience on that.
No one's rushing to answer that. Does anyone want to take that question?
Maybe I'll just comment a bit more than Divya. I think when it comes to the kind of ticket sizes that you sometimes need to, if you're establishing some of a local presence, as an example, within a country, and you're trying to scale your product within some of these regions, blended finance also just manages the risk profiles sometimes of the equity investors that are coming in. They're a bit shaky to get involved with. As I said before, and a lot of equity investors, particularly VCs, were quite burnt early on in the decade in getting involved in productive use equipment, or equipment that is a bit more expensive and more complex than your kind of passive solar technology, as an example. And I think there's still a degree of risk that is held by those kind of investors. And so any form of an approach with blended finance around different forms of debt equity, as an example, in that approach does also support in alleviating some of that perceived risk that sits in the mind of equity investors, to know that for every dollar spent, they're able to expand the amount of non-dilution equity that's going into that business.
Okay, thanks. I think we have a few minutes left, but I'll ask this next question to Dr. Evan. Since you do quite a bit of research in this sector as well, how are the sort of inefficiencies or inconsistencies in data that's available in the sector? How does that impact your work and impact the sector?
If I understood correctly, we don't have much data, especially from sub-Saharan Africa, when you start looking at productive use of energy or appliances or weak grid or off-grid appliances. So it's a field that is coming up. In fact, it is only, I think, for the first time last year, Efficiency for Access released an appliances, the off-grid appliances report, and they reported on electric cooking for the first time, because it's a field that is starting to get attention. When you look at the other, say, productive use fields, solar water pumping could be the one that is most advanced here. While the others are still, when you look mostly at the agricultural value chain, the others are still in their nascent stages. I hope I addressed the question.
Yeah, thank you. Just check on time. Well, I'm just going to pick on something Tushar said earlier about efficiency. I think just within this whole, clean energy innovation conversation, efficiency is just looked at, when we talk about large appliances like cooling, cooling and heating. But there's also, especially in rural contexts, there's also a greater need for making more efficient appliances, just regular appliances that people use. So is there much work in that area in terms of investments, in terms of innovation and R&D? Does anyone want to address that?
Sure, Divya, I'll take a crack. So I think the main thing that we're focusing on, so when we talk about efficiency, we're always, at least in our company, we're talking about DC, whether it's to make it more compatible with solar or solar battery. We want to avoid any type of inverter losses that happen when you connect an AC load to a solar home system. That being the case, even within a DC appliance, we work very closely. So half the cost of a solar refrigerator installation is the solar panel and the battery unit. Now, the other half's the refrigerator. We can knock off costs from the refrigerator, but it's almost easier to make the compressor, the PUF foam, and everything within the unit, the evaporators, the condensers, better so that you consume less battery and therefore you need fewer panels. And we've been working on that relentlessly over the past 2 years. And we think we reached a point where we're happy with a relatively smaller sized solar system attached to it that would still give 24/7 autonomy. But I think efficiency, I think most of us have efficiency in sight because it just drives directly into affordability.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, thanks for that, Tushar. I think that is all the questions that we have time for. Thank you once again to all the panelists for joining this discussion and for offering your insights. I'm just going to hand this back over to Bala, and he's just going to wrap up.
Hey, a big thank you, Divya, Ross, Dr. Evan, Tushar, and Donson for sharing your thoughts and experiences on this topic with us. It was such a delight to be part of this discussion and hear you all. Up next, please do head over to our networking lounges to meet with Siddharth Suran of Olam and Lisa and Camila from Media Foundation. Also, we have a very interesting session coming up on building the business case for housing microfinance from Habitat for Humanity International. See you guys there soon. Thank you. Thanks.